Well, welcome everyone. We have a fabulous presentation with local functional medicine practitioner, Michelle Sandwisch, and she's speaking on the topic of the resilient brain, building mental fitness at any age. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks. And thanks, Elizabeth and Marlene's for having me out here tonight. This is kind of take two for us, but so you guys already heard this, but I'm a nurse practitioner, conventionally trained through Georgetown University. And then I have this bonus training through the Institute of Functional Medicine, which I think is absolutely a better way to care for patients. It's more comprehensive root causes of things. Tonight's topic, the resilient brain, building mental fitness at any age, it's going to be mostly on talking about Alzheimer's disease and dementias. But really, I think what I would say is that the strategies that we use for that, they have found work for almost anything, whether you have attention deficit disorder, depression, anxiety. It can even, like other diseases like bipolar, because we have to look for the underlying cause. And sometimes what's happening inside the body, such as inflammation or, like a hormone disruption, can really have an effect systemically, and it ends up manifesting in the brain. And it all depends on what your genetics are. And that's it, and that can just be another symptom or manifestation. That's how I look at it. So then we have to go in, look at it, and kind of unwind it, and then figure out the strategy that best works for you. It's a very personalized approach. My clicker's not working again. Sorry, we'll just pause for just a second here for this. We froze for just a second.
Hi, folks. Gotta love technology.
Oh, something just happened.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So this is Lisa Genova, and she's a pretty famous neuroscientist. She wrote the book Still Alice. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie or read the book, but it's on a patient or a woman who ended up having early onset Alzheimer's disease. It's something that she's passionate about because she has members of her family that have had Alzheimer's. And I really recommend, I've left the YouTube video at the top, the link to that. So she kind of goes into the pathophysiology and other things, but it's well worth watching. But the very beginning of this really resonates with me. So I want to kind of introduce my talk tonight So I'm going to ask you guys, how many of you would like to live to be 80 years old if you knew the quality of life would be good? I think most of us, if our quality of life, we would say yes. Let's kind of project out into the future, pretend like we're in our 80s and even let's say 85. So I want you now to look at two people, okay? And I want you to realize that one of you probably has Alzheimer's disease or some form of dementia. And you might sit there and think, well, it's not going to be me because I'm going to do everything that I can do to prevent it. But if it's not you, it means you're probably caring for someone that has Alzheimer's disease. So it really does affect our entire lives, right? And it's something I think is really scary for most of us because we're constantly told, once you have that diagnosis, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to prevent it, especially if you have certain genetics, right? But I am of the stance that, sorry about that, that there's a lot that we can do to prevent and to even reverse in some cases. Certainly the earlier we get to it, the easier it is to reverse. And I will just kind of leave that at the age of 65 in the US, one in the time that you're 85, it's one, the statistic is 1 in 2. So it's pretty significant. Okay. So we're just going to talk about mental fitness and what that is. Exactly. So I want you to think about your brain sort of as a muscle, is just exactly like your muscle that benefits from a really good workout. So just like your muscles benefit from a really good workout, so does your brain. It keeps it healthy and strong, especially if we engage in certain activities. It can help you your brain stay fit and resilient. When we care about resiliency in our brain, it's sort of like understanding what I just talked about. It's just really never too late to start. Even if you feel like, gosh, I can feel myself declining. What does that mean now? I can't go back. It's never too late to start. I will tell you that. We can build mental fitness by kind of keeping our emotions stable, and then also through activities like puzzles, exercise, and spending time with friends. And so I'll explain that in a little bit. It has to do with neuroplasticity. This can help us make better decisions and live just a better quality of life all around. So what are some mental fitness indicators? Well, first one, resiliency. It's the ability to bounce back from stress, adversity, failure, challenges, or even a trauma. So just like a ball, if I threw a ball and up against the wall and you want it to bounce back, that's what we want that flexibility or that resiliency. Stress management. We want to be able to effectively handle stress. We know like a lot of times when we get that neuroinflammation, it becomes harder to be able to handle that stress. But we need to learn some coping mechanisms if we're not, relaxation techniques, things like that, exercise. Emotional regulation. We want to both be able to manage our own emotions and be able to handle other people's emotions, right? And then we want cognitive flexibility, which is the capacity to adapt to thinking and behavior to new, changing, or unexpected events and be able to work those out. Self-awareness. We want to understand our own values, goals, and boundaries. And then we want to recognize how that has an impact on each other and how others have an impact on us and when there's a mismatch. And then attention and concentration is just that ability to be able to focus appropriately. There's a form of ADD where you can be too ultra focused, and it's a quiet type of ADD. Not all ADD or ADHD is people bouncing off walls or not being able to sit still. There's a type that's a quiet type, and they become too focused in something. So that's actually a sign of kind of this brain inflammation. We want positive social relationships. We want to engage in maintaining healthy and rewarding relationships. Sometimes when we don't have that desire, that can be one of the first signs that something's going on in our brain. Having a sense of purpose is really important. We want to know what gives us meaning in life. It's different for everybody. We want to have an outlook on life that the cup is half full, not the cup that is half empty. And then we want to have good problem solving skills. So we want to know, be able to think about solutions and not think that we're going to be stumped or overwhelmed by difficulties. Okay. So I want you to think of the concept of brain resiliency is equal to something called cognitive reserve. So what does that mean? This concept of cognitive reserve originated in the 80s. There was a study, it's a famous study called the Nun study. It was, I believe, nuns in Wisconsin that donated their bodies to science after they died. I think it was about 100 or so. And they ended up doing autopsies on many of these nuns, and they found that they actually had signs and thought that they should have had Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, and many of them didn't. So what they realized was, well, something was protective. Well, nuns, if you think about nuns, they have a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, a sense of community. They also have a tendency to play games and do a lot of reading and sort of kind of build in this cognitive reserve, and what I'm going to refer to is neuroplasticity. Okay. Positive mental fitness enhances this cognitive reserve, right? It reduces stress-related damage, boosts brain plasticity and neurogenesis, and it lowers that dementia risk. And it just contributes to that healthier lifespan that we're all looking for. We're all looking for longevity and quality of life. What's the point, really, in my opinion? If we don't have that quality of life later in life, it's sort of like, you know, not as good, right? Okay. So basically, how do you create cognitive reserve and resilience? That name I said, neuroplasticity. It's the idea that the brain can relearn once learned skills and pick up new ones. So we used to think, or even like back in the 80s, that adults didn't have this ability for neuroplasticity. But they know we do have the ability to grow new neural pathways. So a really good example is someone has a stroke, but they learn how to re-walk. It's also true that if you start losing part of your memory, that you can, if you're mindful about it, you can build new pathways around new maps or new roadways, right, around those pathways, if you're being mindful about it and cognizant, and you're trying to prevent and that type of thing. Okay, so I'm going to go over kind of a 3-step approach to brain resiliency strategies. And step one is resist and protect your foundation. 2 is reinforce your cognitive defenses. And 3 is to restore broken pathways. So the first one, we basically want to protect your foundation. And the focus here is prevention, prevention, prevention. Basically, you want to do all the right things. And what does all the right things kind of encompass? It really encompasses what I call the 5 pillars of health. So the first one is good nutrition. We want to maintain a healthy diet. We all know, I think I touched upon genetics, right? We're born with a certain set of genetics, and we can't change those genetics. But what is also true is we have a fine-tuning volume that we can turn up and down on those genetics. So things like nutrition and movement and sleep, stress and detoxification, those all can have an impact. And we need to do things kind of the right way in order to turn that volume up. And we can reverse some of these things. We used to think kind of once, you know, for instance, diabetes was turned on, that it couldn't be turned off. It's not true. We can throw it into remission. It's just kind of once those types of diseases start, we have to do more things right, build resiliency in so that we stay, kind of lock it in. And over time, we have a little bit more ability to, a little more flexibility, but if we kind of continue those things, we're going to reverse. Movement, exercising regularly is very, very important. The new topic kind of this year, I just did some continuing education a few weeks ago through the Institute of Functional Medicine, and they talked a lot about muscle mass. I want you to think of muscle as the currency of longevity. It is true that cardiovascular disease is still the #1 killer, cancer, lung disease, things of that nature. But what they really talked about is the quality of your muscle initiates metabolic disease, and that first initiation is insulin resistance, and that can start as soon as even in adolescence. So we have to keep active. We have to do strength training, and I went every kind of decade after the age of 30, we lose, I think, something like 5% of our muscle mass. We're on pause here for just a second. Okay. I did not. Sorry, my slides are not forwarding. There we go. There we go. Okay. Okay, so we talked about nutrition and movement. Sleep, getting sufficient sleep is really important. It is not a badge to not get any sleep and to kind of do an all-nighter. They know that that is really damaging to our health. Shift workers have much more cardiovascular disease and a kind of a higher rate of death than the general population. The first half of the night is for deep sleep. That's kind of when we cleanse our brain and sort of like sponges, you know, it's sort of like a sponge. The janitor comes along and cleans things out. They didn't even know that that happened until, I don't know, say 10, 15 years ago, that we had our own type of lymph system in the brain. And that's during deep sleep for about an hour and a half every night. That's when we detoxify our brains. The second half of the night, if you don't have good quality of sleep, is where our dream state or our REM sleep. Also really important because that is when we work out stress. This time during sleep is also when we lower inflammation in the body and kind of do a reset. So it's really, really important. Stress management, things like meditation practices and prayer are really important because it helps lower inflammation and it builds resiliency. And then things like detoxification, we want to avoid harmful substances like excessive alcohol and drugs, minimize exposures to toxins and pollutants. Alcohol is kind of an interesting one because excessive alcohol has been shown for, obviously is very, very detrimental, but then there's this thing about the Mediterranean diet. And so is it good or isn't it good? I would say the research is a little mixed, but there's a thought that there's a alcohol while drinking, or if you drink alcohol with someone, right, that's a lot different than drinking alone. There's no Bud Light commercials with anybody drinking alone on a commercial for a reason, right? It's kind of provide a sense of community. There's also a thought that it helps pick up nutrients, phytonutrients from our diet and go across the blood-brain barrier in very, very small amounts. So for women, that's 1 alcoholic drink per night. I would say I don't even like people to drink every night. And for men, that's 2. Anything more is considered excessive. And then we want to be properly eliminating. We want to be sweating. If you don't sweat, that's problematic. We want to have good lung fitness because that is a way that we get toxins out of our body. Our skin integrity is important. So people with eczema and allergies, we want to try to figure those things out and get that skin integrity back to where it's supposed to be at baseline. And then we want to make sure we're having bowel movements and urinating appropriately too, because it's a big source of toxin elimination. Okay, so step 2, reinforce cognitive defenses and maintenance. So we want to what are some strategies that we use to reinforce? So this is sort of like if we were building a house or if we had our house, right? We would have to do maintenance on that house. So when I'm talking about reinforcing, we want to just kind of make sure that we're doing everything that we can. If we see, I don't know, the dishwasher isn't working right, we just go in and fix it, these small little things. And we want to do it preventively, ideally preventively. So how do we do that? We do that through sort of mental stimulation through learning and cognitive challenges. So things like brain games, for instance. There's plenty of apps out there, Luminosity, Elevate, things like that. We talked a lot about physical exercise, and that muscle is, again, that longevity of the currency of longevity. And then I think we don't talk enough about trauma resolution. Many adults are very happy to not kind of deal with their traumas from their childhood, or even from bad relationships that they're in or have been in. But that unresolved trauma and that adversity is really good at creating inflammation in the brain. PTSD in and of itself, right, can turn on inflammation. And sometimes that is the key to getting inflammation to be turned off. You really do have to try to work some of that out. It's a big source of autoimmunity. And I would even challenge that the idea that maybe Alzheimer, and they're talking about Parkinson's disease, some of these things are really an autoimmune process, meaning the immune system's kind of self-attacking, right? We think of autoimmune disease as more like rheumatoid arthritis and things like that, but there is a thought that these neural cognitive diseases are really a type of autoimmunity as well. And then social engagement, it also promotes those new neural connections as well. And step 3, restore broken pathways and repair them. Okay, so I want you to imagine above us that there are, let's call it 36 to 100 holes. What would happen if I only repaired one hole, right? We would have, and it rained, we would have a mess. This is Pacific Northwest. So we would still have flooding. We have to patch all these holes if we expect the roof to be closed. So I don't know how many people have heard of Bredesen, Dr. Bredesen. Okay. So there's a neurologist named Dale Bredesen. I don't know, he wrote The End of Alzheimer, probably, gosh, 10 years ago already. It's maybe even a little bit longer. And it's really the first program to prevent and reverse cognitive decline. And he's really he's done a lot of research. He started off because as a neurologist in practice, I got really, I think, sad and tired of telling, basically delivering news. Your loved one has Alzheimer or you have Alzheimer's disease. There's really nothing I can do for you. Just basically go home and you kind of have to live with it, right? And prepare yourselves. So he decided that he was going to become a researcher, and his research kind of came up with this idea that the dominant theory of Alzheimer, and really the therapies, right, that we've tried to use are doing it wrong. Basically, they failed. I mean, none of these therapies work, and it's because we're looking for a silver bullet, and we're looking for only one root cause when there's many root causes. So it's the idea of the 36 holes. He's even found up to 100 now. That was his original research. And basically, you have to close up all the holes, because if you don't, you're not going to fix anything. So while medications may be helpful, we also, how do we handle this? We have to do everything right in terms of lifestyle and things like that. Okay. Let's see. So this next slide is called, have you had your colonoscopy? Most of you probably know what this is, but most of you, many of you probably don't know what that is. So everybody knows what a colonoscopy is, I'm sure, here, right? So it's kind of the same idea where you go in and you're looking to see what are the things, do I have disease in my colon? We want to know, we have disease starting in our brain? And ideally you want to do that before you have symptoms. You might have symptoms, but ideally you want to do it before. Part of Bredesen's work, along with this idea that there's not just one cause of Alzheimer, he was able to kind of package certain symptoms into different types of Alzheimer. So I think this is kind of hard to see, but his original was about 3, and he's kind of come up with more like 7. But the type 1 is an inflammatory type. So that would be something like cardiovascular disease, or like some type of infection that's kind of stewing. A lot of times it's starting in the gut. So that's type 1. Type 2 or type 1.5 is insulin resistance and diabetes. That's a very popular one. Type 2 is what we call tropic deficiencies, and that's hormonal imbalances. So we all know as we get older, we lose our hormones, especially women through menopause, but men also go through what's called andropause, right? We need those for brain protection, bone protection, and heart protection as well. And also thyroid. Thyroid's a big one as well. 4 is a vascular type, so that would be like high blood pressure. 5 is trauma. So, and we're talking about like football injuries or concussions and things like that. And there's more out there, but you kind of get the gist that there's not just one type of Alzheimer. And I would tell you, it goes across the board with every neurological disease. You have to really look and see what the underlying cause is for different people. Okay. So. Okay, so similar to kind of my idea of these 3 steps, Bredesen has what's called the Bredesen 7. It's really similar to kind of the 5 pillars of health that I presented earlier. He adds in supplements and that brain stimulation as well. He just kind of simplifies that whole kind of that 3-step, 3R program that I'm talking about. All right. So I wanted to kind of present to you, like if you were my patient, how I would go about treating you. And this will kind of give you an idea of the things that I would look at and how do we do that cleanup. So if you come to see me, the first thing I do is have you fill out forms, which is the bane of everyone's existence. But they're really, really important. Even knowing about childhood history can be really important. So I'll give you a really good example. Overdue babies and premature babies often will have less kidney cells than others. It's a hidden cause of hypertension. So when we ask you to fill out those forms, they can be really, really important. That's just a good example. I do a social history, a family history. You want to know kind of all of those things. And then something called an ACE score, which is kind of referring to that trauma. It just helps me kind of discern, I think that you have trauma that's unresolved. Other things that I look at are things like hand grip testing. Why do I look at that? It's actually a surrogate for, and it's predictive of chronic disease, such as heart disease, stroke, obesity, diabetes, depression. It's kind of tells me that talk about like the currency of your muscle. Do you have muscle wasting? Are you at risk for fall? It's a huge predictor of mortality after the age of 65. They know if you have a fall, the statistic is, I can't remember the exact statistic, but I want to say it's like 80% fatality in a year. I mean, it's huge. So yes, cardiovascular disease is still the #1 killer, but we have to be thinking about sarcopenia and that disease process starting in that muscle. So we really have to be cognizant of it. I do body comp testing. I want to know how much lean body mass you have. If you don't have enough lean body mass, it's more important to me than kind of how much your weight is. I don't really care about that. What I really care about is how much skeletal muscle mass do you have and what is the quality of that skeletal muscle mass. And it's going to give me all kinds of measurements. Everybody hates this test, but and then I do something called a resting metabolic test. This is a breath test. I don't know if anybody knows what VO2 testing is, but it's done by endurance athletes. This is the counterpart to that. It can be really helpful to kind of evaluating how good are you, or do you have metabolic flexibility, meaning when you're in a fasted state, are you good at kind of tapping into those fat stores, or are you still trying to burn carbohydrates or your stores of sugar in your body first? We don't really want to be doing that. A lot of times that is a reason like blood sugar kind of goes down too much, or it comes up too much in the morning, or we wake up at night. It can be a reason. We want to be able to tap into those stores and create what are called ketones in the brain, in the body, in the brain, because that's anti-inflammatory to the brain. Many people are not doing that, have insulin resistance and poor blood sugar control. It's going to tell us a little bit about your fitness, your metabolic fitness. It's going to tell us a little bit about heart fitness. It's going to tell us a little bit about lung fitness. Are your lungs working right? And then, are you getting enough oxygen to your brain? And a little bit about breathing and posture. I can always go back onto that STICU too. You can evaluate. It's really that STICU body comp is really good at evaluating posture as well. If you're not standing up straight, you're not able to get enough oxygen into your brain. If you're humped over like this, it can be an underlying cause of poor cognition. If we don't have oxygen going through our body, we don't, we can't think straight. We can't do the body functions that we're kind of the biochemical processes in our body that we're meant to be doing. Okay. And we do just a normal EKG. This would be an example. I do approximately anywhere between 85 and 100 different type of testing, blood testing. When you come in, it's very comprehensive. So I'm looking at things like homocysteine, cardiovascular disease, blood sugar control, hormone, inflammation markers, certain vitamin markers and things like that. Are you anemic? What does your thyroid look like? Those types of things. And then if I knew, you know, after talking to you and kind of gathering that information from that initial, from those initial forms that you filled out that you're already having a cognitive issue, we might look at more testing for the colonoscopy, basically. So things like, I can't point out to this, but the CNS vital signs, that's just kind of baseline neurocognitive testing. And you can do it online, but it gives us kind of our baseline. And I'd like to do that sometimes, even if people are really interested in their brain health. It just gives us a baseline to look at, and then we can kind of do comparisons and see if what we're doing is working. Other things we might look at are, we might do a stool test and a comprehensive stool test and look for infections. Are you having, you know, low pancreatic enzyme function? Do you have hidden infections in the gut? And is that something that we need to go in and attack? Is that an underlying cause? Same thing, this second one is a heavy metals test. Sometimes you have a toxic load and we need to, especially here, it can be a problem with mercury and arsenic in the soil, even lead. And we have to go in and kind of do a cleanup on that. And then one of the things that I used to do more is I would do baseline MRI testing and run it through a software program that would do measurements of brain size, but it's expensive and it's kind of a long test, right? So the kind of the newer thing is that there's these biomarkers that are really good and they're really specific to certain cognitive, neurocognitive conditions. So p-tau 2217 is kind of a hot one right now. And it can kind of, it's really specific to Alzheimer's disease. And you can kind of, they use it to measure to see if you're making improvements. The plasma neurofilament and the glial fibrillary acidic protein, the GFAP, those can be kind of identify things like frontal temporal lobe dementias. But also, we saw this a lot in long-term COVID. Some of these markers were elevated. So it can kind of help differentiate that and see and tell us whether you're getting better as well. Okay. So what do treatments look like? So I weigh heavily on lifestyle medicine. If you're my patient, I ask about these things every single time you come in and get an update, because I want to keep you accountable and I want to kind of keep you on course, right? So we talked about sleep, that helps us have good energy. We talked about the importance of movement. Nutrition, for most people, I recommend a Mediterranean diet, type of diet. Some people need more ketones, which I kind of touched on with that kind of that fasted state. Dr. Bredesen uses the KetoFlex diet as a therapeutic type of diet. And he actually has a delivery service too, for that as well. So sometimes I do use that. And then we have to think about stress. The picture with the little kind of thing that goes around the neck is called it's a vagal nerve stimulator. Sometimes I use that because that can help reduce anxiety, blood pressure. You have your vagus nerve runs from your brain to your gut, and it's the largest cranial nerve that we have. As we get older, it's notoriously, we can we can look at something called heart rate variability, and which is just kind of the beat to beat difference of our heart. Typically, it's the opposite of what we think. We think that we want our heartbeat to be, if our heart rate is 60, we want it to be right on cue. We actually have a little bit of variability, and that's good because that means we're in parasympathetic mode, and that's rest and digest. When you're sleeping, you're supposed to be in parasympathetic mode. You're not supposed to be running for Malayan when you sleep. It's a sign of stress. So the lower your heart rate variability is, the more stress you are. Stimulating the vagal nerve here, you can also do it naturally through like singing, gargling, things like that, can be really helpful. It modulates the immune system. It is in control of your heart rate. It has an impact on kind of brain health or migraines. It can be really, really, really helpful, and blood pressure. The bottom thing at the bottom is something called brain tap. It's sort of like a hack for people who don't really like to meditate. It has these, it's sort of like guided imagery, but it has what are called binaural beats along with it, which stimulate the brain waves. And then it also has flashing lights. So it's really, really effective and working quickly, and it upregulates neurotransmitters in the brain. So I like that technology a lot as well. And then we talked a little bit about relationships. Community, I think, is really important. They know that social isolation, and I think I always talk about this, is probably one of the worst things for inflammation. It's worse than smoking something like 6 cigarettes per day, and kind of that high level of alcohol intake. It's much worse than that. It has a higher inflammatory hit in the body. And we felt that during COVID, right? And I think that's why, like, some of these, the kind of the state of affairs, hopefully we're going to come out of this a little bit, but it had such an impact during COVID. It's because we were all isolated. And then we talked about trauma and kind of working out that trauma, meditation, things like that. Okay. So we do all that, and what are some kind of treatment considerations that I might look at? In terms of supplements, foundationally, I always find that most people need fish oil, and they need about 1,500 to 1,800 grams of EPA. It's not the same thing as an omega-3. Yes, you can get omega-3s from diet, and yes, you can get it from fish, but most people are not good at it. But EPA is where the money is. And DHA is typically follows along with that, and that helps lower brain inflammation and just inflammation in the body. We all almost always need D3 and K2, even if we're out in the sun, even if we live in Arizona. That is typical, and you always want to pair that D3 with vitamin K. Why? Because otherwise calcium has a tendency to leach out of bone and into blood vessel, or it goes to places where we don't want it. And that's not good. I would say always a multivitamin. Most people need magnesium, and then sometimes we'll do different types of brain support, but testing usually determines that and kind of just what your health history tells me. Other considerations are if I did testing and I found that you had a kind of a huge toxic load, or your liver is clogged, or you're not pooping, basically, we have to work on detoxification, because that's a buildup of toxins that's damaging to joints. It's damaging to, we have these little things called mitochondria in our skeletal muscle and organs. That is where we derive our energy, and they get damaged really easy through toxins. So we need to kind of clean that up, and that can be a problem as well. And sometimes a gut protocol is in order, because you find that you have some type of infection in the gut, or you're not making enough enzymes to be able to break down your food and you're not absorbing vitamins and minerals, things like that. So we have to go in and kind of fix those things. Often that is a reason for food sensitivities and allergies as well. Sometimes we work on weight management. You do the other things, typically weight management takes care of itself, but not always. And then sometimes I have to do prescriptions. It's not my typical go-to sometimes, but I would say if it's an urgent, we use prescriptions to try to get things under control. And then we use the least amount that we can, and then we back off on it. I do that. It's that's kind of an integrative approach. Sometimes that's the answer. Because we can't risk, things like a heart attack or in the case of like rheumatoid arthritis, right? If you lose that bone, you never get it back. So you have to be kind of mindful and smart about it. Okay. Last slide here, and this is kind of just going to sum everything up. So my approach to cognitive resiliency is to, number one, resist and protect your foundation. That's prevention, prevention, prevention through those 5 pillars. Through like detoxification, nutrition, exercise, those types of things. You want to reinforce your cognitive defenses. And those are the things such as the mental stimulation, your physical activity, making sure you're doing strength training, sense of community, sense of purpose, and then resolving trauma. And then the last thing is kind of restoring those broken pathways, right? And I urge all of you to do a cognoscopy in order to kind of discern if you have any, just like you would, anything else. So I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight. And then I'm just going to open up the window, if that's okay, to questions. Does anybody have questions?
The last thing that you were mentioning is little things that I forget what you were saying about it, but it was
Yeah, so your skin is actually the largest organ of absorption. It's your skin is huge, right? So think about when you step into a shower, for instance, most of our water has chlorine in it, and it kind of wipes everything out, but you can also pick up those toxins from your skin. So number one, we don't really like to do that, but number two, if you have any break in that skin integrity, it's going to be really easy for you to pick that up, to pick up toxins from the environment. Yeah. Or really infections or, anything else too. Yes. Yeah. Flushed out. Yes. And if you have a breach, you can't really sweat those toxins out either. So we want to prevent them from coming in, but we also want to get them out of the system as well. Mm-hmm.
Mediterranean diet. I agree. But you mentioned that you use keto or something.
So it's called keto flax. So Atkins is a terrible ketogenic diet, right? So we're eating like a protein. It's basically a low carb, higher fat, but predominantly vegetables. It's sort of like a cross between a ketogenic protein diet and probably has a little more meat, a little more fat than a Mediterranean diet.
Protein.
Yeah.
It's not a huge meat either.
Yeah.
So
I will urge you to, you don't have to necessarily be a meat eater, but then you need to supplement with some type of protein. And you have to, if you're going to do that, you have to pair those proteins together and get a complete protein. So same conference that I was talking about, they were talking, we know that adolescents, right, for instance, they can eat a little bit of protein that can kind of graze through their day, eat 5 grams of protein there, 50 grams here, 10 grams, 2 hours later, and they absorb it all and it goes into making skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle, the strength of that partly is responsible for our metabolism. So they have a tendency to be able to lose weight really fast. Seems like we're getting away from that, we have that obesity epidemic, and that's kind of trickling down to our kids, but they have a much easier time losing weight than adults do. Why is that? Because once you get into your 20s, 30s, you lose the ability to be able to take in 5 grams of protein here and 10 grams. You have to eat 30 to 50 grams of protein in one sitting to be able to churn muscle synthesis on. If you're not doing that, you're basically going to tap into your own muscle stores and you're going to put weight on. It's a reason, kind of a hidden reason for why adults gain weight and why they can't lose weight. Sometimes we're not getting enough calories, even though we're doing the exact opposite. We're trying to take off, lower our calorie and lower our protein intake. Yes.
Why not getting enough protein with
Because you're losing your muscle mass. You will waste muscle, and that the ultimate result of that is that affects your metabolism. And by the way, it's gonna raise cortisol because that ends up being a endogenous stressor to the body. And you need to make protein somehow, or you need to make muscle mass, or you need protein for almost every enzyme reaction that's in the body. You need it for muscle, you need it for neurotransmitters, you need it for all these types of things. Detoxification is very, very, very important. It's the nutrient of satiety as well. So if you're not getting enough protein, it will actually cause weight gain. And you can't churn that muscle synthesis on. And then you get things like sarcopenia. You get muscle wasting. What takes over? You get muscle fat stores. So I have a lot of people that do this, the body comp. They look very, very healthy, and their percent body fat is like 35%. And I have the opposite, where people don't look as healthy, but their lean body mass is much better. I mean, it's amazing. I had a guy that actually ended up having cardiovascular disease, and he looked very, very healthy. And we did a breath test on him, and his oxygenation levels were off, and I was like, something's not right, and sent him to cardiology. And but so why the 30 to 50? There's if you want to know, if you want me to kind of geek out on this, I will. There's a process in the body called mTOR. So protein is about the equivalent of, if you've ever heard of branched chain amino acids, athletes will sometimes, supplement with those before or after they lift, which is helpful, but it's still not a complete protein. So in which you really need that complete protein in order to kind of do everything in the body. So I like the complete protein better. But that is that leucine in particular is an individual amino acid that makes up a complete protein, which is, I don't know, can't remember what the number is, but that initiates the turn on of stimulates muscle. And then you need kind of everything else in place, all the other types of amino acids that are out there in order to produce muscle. That makes sense? Yeah, yes. And it takes about 30 grams to make, is equivalent about of 2.5 grams of leucine. So that's the magic number.
You're not. I mean, it's not gonna just make enough, if they're not. Really, you gotta be doing something.
Yes, I mean, it's like. That is true, but it will still stimulate muscle production. It'll just be kind of lax, if that makes sense. It's sort of like. What happens if you break your arm and you have the disuse, you get that muscle wasting, that is true, you're gonna have some muscle wasting. But you don't want to be pulling more muscle from your body as well, right? Makes sense. Let's see. So I said 30 to 50, you can't eat more than 50 in one sitting. Because if you do, it gets stored as fat. So you have to, it gets stored as fat. Yeah, it's not true that protein doesn't, it's harder for the body to do it, but it will. It'll start making sugar, and sugars get stored as fat. Yes.
Well, this is one not from Latin America, I think it's a sunshine sheep, something like that.
What was that?
Not, it's from Latin America. Sunshine sheep, something like that, and I don't know. They claim to have a complete protein. I bought this as a.
Oh, chia seed? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's a nut.
Different nuts, I don't know the name now either.
It's from Latin America. It's like a flour, such an inch, something.
Okay. Probably fine if it's a complete protein, but sometimes you have to eat
I
it.
bought this on the
Yeah,
Amazon or where.
but you have to eat enough of them in order to get 30 grams of protein.
We don't taste that good.
Yeah, but you can put them in food and it's going to contribute to the kind of overall, right? Yeah, probably really good for you. It's probably got really good, other phytonutrients and omegas in it as well.
You mentioned this ketogenic.
Yes.
My boss is ketogenic. I did the research, they say for short time, perfect. For long time, too much stress on the kidneys and the heart.